Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Many of his Brexiteer cabinet colleagues resigned when the reality of the kind of exit from the EU that the Prime Minister was backing became clear. But today, Liam Fox, the International Trade Secretary, announced he supports her. It's a boost ahead of the vote that's looming on a deal which at least 90 of his Conservative colleagues have already said they won't back. Today, Mrs May herself vowed at the G20 in Argentina that Britain would be well placed to strike new deals after Brexit, despite a warning from President Trump that her proposal leaves her able to do no such thing. Newsnight has spent much of the last fortnight asking if Mrs May's deal will pass. Tonight, we examine how, if it does, the UK would be placed to shape its global trading future. Dr Fox spoke today in Bristol. David Grossman went there too.
Sending out a signal to the world. The SS Great Britain in dry dock in Bristol was built in the mid-1800s, when Europe was in turmoil and Britain looked for trading opportunities elsewhere. Steam-powered, iron hull, this was the beginning of a revolution in international trade.
It's no accident that the International Trade Secretary has come here to Bristol to make his speech. From this city, it's a long way round to the near continent, but a shorter distance to the rest of the world. It is to the horizons where the SS Great Britain once sailed that Liam Fox wants us to lift our post-Brexit eyes.
Speaking at the Royal Portbury shipping terminal near Avonmouth, Dr Fox urged MPs to support the Prime Minister's deal.
Now it's time for us to raise our sights and acknowledge that there is a world beyond Europe and a time beyond Brexit. The International Monetary Fund has predicted that 90% of global growth in the next 5 years will originate outside the EU.
At Procore in Bristol, they help companies move staff around the world. Wider horizons, trade deals with new countries could all be good for their business.
I think that there will be difficult times for everybody if we crash out of Europe with no deal or the deal isn't good enough. However, I do think there's always opportunity outside of our boundaries. So as a global mobility provider for many, many years, we're used to putting people into different countries, arranging visas. So we can see an opportunity and a way of facilitating the movement of people no matter what happens.
Just as this ship was cutting edge in its day, the government wants Britain's trading future to be high-tech. Aerospace, financial technology, artificial intelligence, all at the fore.
But how shipshape are we for the wide open seas post-Brexit? The government insists we'll absolutely be able to make new trade deals. But in practice, how easy will it be?
Well, what's quite interesting about the transition period as it's set out in the withdrawal agreement is that the clause stipulates that we can't do anything that would prejudice the interests of the European Union as we negotiate new trade agreements. So the question I would have is, how can you negotiate a new trade agreement with a partner that may already have a trade agreement with the EU in a way that isn't prejudicial to EU interests? So strictly speaking, I suppose there's sufficient space to negotiate new agreements. We wouldn't be able to conclude them until we actually left officially after the transition period ends. But there is this question mark over what it means to be doing something that is against the interests of the European Union.
So this is a high injection moulding machine. It turns granules of ABS with a colorant from granules into a completed product.
At Mouldmaster in Bristol, they make plastic components to ship all over the world. You won't find anyone keener than CEO Martin Betty to find new markets, but he says it would be foolish to turn away from existing customers.
We have three priorities. Number one priority is to hang on to what we've got. Number two priority is sell more to our existing client base. And number three is to find new markets. But it has to be in that ratio, and it has to be at that level, because right now there is a lot of pressure on on all British suppliers selling to Europe, and we need to maintain our European clients because they are vitally important to our overall volume and our overall business.
Turning out new trade deals won't be as speedy as moulding plastic pipe. The conduits of international commerce take years to evolve. The International Trade Secretary wants us to shift the tiller towards the wide open sea, but there are many barriers to navigate on the way.
David Grossman there, and proving how febrile the politics of this deal remain. Tonight, details of another ministerial resignation. The university's minister, Sam Guimart, has told The Telegraph he cannot back the deal. Now, we asked the Department of International Trade to join us tonight, but nobody was available. But I am joined by David Hennig, who was a senior official at the department until earlier this year, and by Iana Dreyer from Borderlex, the EU trade policy website. And what I picked up today is that although Liam Fox isn't, he's not given it a ringing endorsement, he does believe, like the Chancellor, like Theresa May, that her deal, this deal, is better for Britain, for trade, than no deal. Would you agree with that, Iana?
If you're going to leave the EU, this is better than no deal at all, because crashing out of the EU would be extremely disruptive and extremely damaging for business, and put Britain in a legal limbo that is going to be damaging for its broader international relations.
David, what would you say about that? No deal or this deal in terms of trade?
In terms of trade, well, it's not a choice I would like to be in, because the problem with this deal is that it's going to be years before we know what we can do trade-wise. All our partners are going to be saying to us, what's your relationship with the EU? We don't know. This deal consists of... It is the blind Brexit that people warned us about.
Except that Liam Fox was saying today, once we're out, as soon, March 29th, from then on, what he said was they'll be out, his department, negotiating, signing and ratifying new trade agreements straight after March.
Well, he's an optimist, and that's nice. I think on April the 1st, there's lots of countries want to talk to us. On April the 1st, we start negotiations. On April the 2nd, they ask what's our relationship going to be with the EU, and we then defer the talks for a few years while we work out the answer to that question.
Well, the IMF says 90% of global growth will come from outside the EU. Dr. Fox says we can now get involved. Surely that's a great thing.
What Dr. Fox will be involved in the next years is basically running to stand still. What he is going to be busy with is to copy the existing good agreements, about 40 agreements with countries around the world with which the EU has already signed preferential agreements. So the DIT is already busy trying to get these countries such as Korea, Switzerland, soon Japan, to agree to give Britain the same terms as it gave the EU. And it's already a very slow, difficult process. International diplomacy is, by definition, very slow. And a lot of what's in those deals just can't be copy-pasted. You still need to know what's going to be a relationship with the EU before you can actually finally conclude.
So you would agree with David that we have to sign the deal with the EU first before anyone else?
Absolutely. And before you can start really having a new deal, let's say, with the United States, this is going to take years. The priority is going to be to salvage what you already have.
I mean, you've worked in the department until very recently. I mean, can you paint a picture of what's going on, what they're preparing, how strong they'll be in the negotiations?
They've spent a lot of time trying to understand what the policy priorities for the UK should be. Now, that hasn't really reached sort of public debate yet, so there'll be a lot of debates yet to happen. What are we going to do about agriculture? Are we going to... A lot of people have said we should lower tariffs on agricultural produce. We can expect that our farmers are not going to be terribly happy about that happening. What's the importance today? Dr. Fox has been talking about the importance of services, which is great. We know that services are really important to the UK economy, but are incredibly difficult to liberalise in trade agreements. Everybody's had real difficulties in doing this before. So what can we really do there? What is it... I mean, when we talk about services, which services? What does that mean?
And do we have the people to do the negotiating? I mean, there was a report out this week that said they needed 240 by March, trade negotiators. They only had 90 trained up. Is that going to be a problem, or do you think they are going to train them all up by then?
Certainly, it's a huge challenge. A lot of people are being trained up, but it's a huge challenge. They haven't done trade negotiations before. They're going to be thrown in. But on the other hand, as I was saying, I can't see them really engaging in large new negotiations. I think if they're spending all their time looking at the agreements that Jana's been discussing, perhaps that's a slightly easier thing to do first, to actually try to stand still on where we are. So I'm not too worried about us having the right numbers. Yes, we're going to be a bit lacking in experience compared to the US, but then perhaps that's a good thing we can't do trade agreements for the next few years.
And
I actually find the UK trade diplomats have learned a lot. I mean, this week, the UK managed to basically clinch a deal with members of the World Trade Organization as to set it, managed to have the first steps to be an independent member outside the EU of that organization. So it's going to join the government procurement agreement, which is an important agreement that gives access to public tendering markets across the world, to the United States, to big markets across there. And I think there was a lot of skill in doing that, because it's not an easy situation for Britain. I think the fundamental problem, however, is that beyond this diplomatic game, at which I think the British state is good, is what is the strategy? What economy do you want to have? Where do you want to go? What are you going to do with your agricultural sector? What services economy do you want to have? What are food standards you're going to have? And a lot, you need this debate at home, who you want to be, before you're going to go out there and negotiate new agreements.
Very quickly, because we haven't got much time, Liam Fox said last year, and he stood by it, that negotiating with the EU will be one of the easiest things in history to do. Do you agree? Do you buy into that?
I think he might have discovered since then that it was a little bit more tricky than he had hoped.
Yeah. Thank you so much, both of you. Jana Dreyer and David Hennig, thank you very much.